cathedral, a Protestant cathedral of Berlin, very big, and I was invited there. We had a concert of the music. And while I was there, I stayed there for 6 weeks. I started walking around, and one day I happened to be in an old bookstore in the old east part of Berlin. At the old east part, it was already, of course, joined into one city. And there I fell upon an album in this shape, and this color. And the album had on the title En Israel, 1912, Berlin, Die Hygiene im Wandel der Zeit, something else. It was translated to hygiene during the ages. I couldn't speak any German, but I started looking at this. I said, Israel must be Jewish. 1912 is the year my mother was born. Hygiene, my father was a doctor. And by the way, opened the first clinic in Bulawayo for the African people, so I had a lot of contact with medicine already before I started studying occupational therapy. So the whole album was interesting. So I didn't understand what was this album, but I decided to buy it for 30 marks. I remember the price. And I went to my friend Dorothy and I said, what is this? And Dorothy looked at it and she said it was in Israel was a shop, a department store. And I said, but why was a department store interested in hygiene? You know, that's rather an unusual connection. So I was very interested. I said, okay, I'm going to go back to where this shop must be and find out who are these people, you know. And I went to the place. Of course, there was no shop anymore, but there was buildings, apartments, and another shop with old books, antiquaria. How do you say it in English? Antique.
Antiquos.
Okay. No, only books. I'm a book freak, you know, so books. So I went in and I showed him my this album I had bought, like this, exactly like this color, but with material. And he said, I've got one too. He went downstairs, comes back up with another album. And on the cover, it had a picture of Pestalozzi. You know, I don't know if you know who Pestalozzi was. He was an educator, important educator, and it had Pestalozzi from Yverdon. Yverdon is a town in my canton, where I live in Switzerland. And he set up this school for children, special education. And of course I had to have that one as well. It was about education. So we have hygiene, we have education. Then I got really interested. I spent the rest of my time in Berlin going around to old bookstores trying to find more albums.
What is the connection to Pestalozzi?
Well,
I want you to see the book, because this was...
Pestalozzi was the Swiss. Now I was in Berlin, and this connects me to Switzerland. Okay. And education, and these Israel people, this family, this Jewish family, then they make one album about hygiene, another one about education, and they're a shop, they're a department store. Why is a department store making such interesting albums? I managed to find 2 more, so I had 4. I had 4 of these albums, and by the time I went back to Switzerland, and I decided I have to collect more and find out. In the meantime, I started researching. There was very little about these people, very little. And then eventually I decided, because the name is hardly known, maybe I can do something through my art that can make a homage to them, because when I started reading about who they were, especially when I found the 1900 I got one album 1900. I managed to collect most of them through internet, and the 1900 album had an essay about what they were doing and how they treated their personnel. And then I decided this has to be known, okay? And so I did it. I mean, and then the second homage, I had not talked much about Wilfred Israel, so the second one I dedicated and brought a visual picture of Wilfred in. But I mean, the family was doing very philanthropic work already before Wilfrid. And I visited the museum, the Wilfrid Israel Museum, while I was doing, or after I had done the project, and they told me that they didn't realize, actually, somebody from the library told me that they hadn't really realized that the family had many philanthropic activities before, but of course in a very different way. But you know that it was Wilfrid who set up the school. You know that, of course, no?
The school in the shop.
Yes, that was Wilfrid Israel. My feeling, how I feel Wilfrid is that he really didn't do this in order to be known. I think it was really his personality to do things, because you don't need the public approval or public recognition. One does sometimes things because one does them because that's what one has to do in this life. And one answers only to something perhaps out there that's bigger than us. He had I don't think he did it because he wanted to be known as a hero, or I honestly don't think so.
It is possible that he did the contrary. He wanted to be in the shadows. Maybe they say that he was a homosexual, so he didn't want to show off. He wanted to be quiet and not in the
homosexuality, probably you're absolutely right, because in those times, homosexuality was even illegal in many places. I later did a project about Benjamin Britten, from his music, from one of his pieces. Of course, also, Benjamin Britten was also homosexual, and that was much later, and in England, and still was illegal, so that's definitely. But I think also he was somebody who had so many different facets, and he was in a commercial environment, and yet in his soul was an artist, and quite left-thinking. Left, I don't like the word left, but sort of a socialist thinker. He would have liked to live probably on the kibbutz as a sculptor. And I think honestly, the way he moved between and I know this because it's similar to me. You move from left to right, from rich to poor, from black to white. To one as an artist, also I have that freedom to move in all these different circles. But I don't own a Kaufhaus. I don't have and Wilfrid Israel had that, and I think he had to, and he wanted to be free to move around like that. Any publicity, I don't think he really needed it. That's my feeling, and I'm sure to be called a kind of hero. It wasn't. I don't think it's his personality, but that's a very personal way I feel. Okay, I don't want this to be taken as fact. It's how I feel. So I would like if your film could show a little more of the artistic side, the interest in Habima. You know that he was a very good friend of that British Isherwood.
He was friends with him?
Yes.
There was some quarrel between them, wasn't there?
Well, not a quarrel. I believe that Isherwood regretted that in his book Goodbye to Berlin, he portrayed, he used it, I think Landauer was the name. He used his friendship with Wilfrid, but I think later he regretted that he gave a certain false impression of what Wilfrid was like. And that just shows, though, that he had many friends in other circles, in artistic circles, and literature circles. And I think he was a very, very particular, special mensch. Wilfrid Israel is a great inspiration to me. He transmitted many things to me, and I then gather this, develop it, and transmit it further through my work. And I think this is the important thing. Transmission, not only in our people, but in all cultures, is what I think has to be kept alive. Every month, every year, I love Pesach for that reason, that we always, every year we remember what once was and where we come from. And it's an important message to transmit. It's all about transmitting, and it's energy from the past, stories from the past for the future. It makes the world a better place.